I'll be flanked by these incredibly talented writers. This is a real treat. This is such an accomplished panel. And I guess I'll just start. I wanted to start by asking you guys, and I assume everybody's bios are included, so I don't need to recap that. But you know, with the entertainment industry, there's no prescribed path, right? It's not like medicine or law, where if you follow these steps, you'll become a doctor or a lawyer. You know, there's no door. Everybody has to crawl in through a different window. And I feel that for people from marginalized communities, it's really hard to, like, that window is locked, you've got to break it, it's really small, it's a crawl space. So I wanted to start by asking each of you, by way of introduction, what was your window? How did you become, what was your path that led you to becoming a professional TV writer, your, you know, breakthrough moment? And we can just go down the line or start.
Oh, hi, Lady J here. I was a classical pianist, and that's all I really wanted to do. And then I discovered, after transitioning in my early 20s, that the music world wasn't really open to trans folks. So I lost a lot of work, and I got really poor. And I was like, what am I gonna do? And so I began exploring different avenues of teaching through my art. And so identity became an important part in my art, and I was doing these, I was singing, songwriting, writing musicals, and I just began to write because I knew that I had to teach in order to stay employed. And through that, I had been writing when I met Jill Soloway at the GLAAD Awards, and Jill asked me if I would be interested in writing television. And I really wanted a gig, so I said yes. And I learned how to write really fast. And you know, I sent her a sample, and then through that was hired into the writer's room.
Yeah, my journey was a little simple. I went to film school at AFI, and I studied screenwriting. And you don't have to go to film school in order to become a TV writer or a feature writer, but for me it was important because I had worked in a completely different field. I was a community organizer. I was very much into politics. That's why I'm going crazy right now with current events. And I knew that I wanted to be a storyteller, so I went to film school. And after that, I had some really big student loans to pay back. So I had to get a job working at different agencies and just trying to learn the business from the ground up. And while I was doing that, and I would just write all the time. And I ended up applying to a bunch of different fellowships, one of which was the Warner Brothers Television Workshop. And I got into the Warner Brothers Workshop, and I ended up spending 6 months working in what is kind of like a simulated writer's room. And out of that program, I got my first job on Shameless, and just went from there.
I started out as an actor, and this is about 12 years ago, and I'm not kidding you when I say every role was gangbanger's girlfriend or gangbanger's sister. So I'd be like, Chewy, put the gun down, orale. Really? There's not a like social worker or a nope, okay. And my frustration with that made me go, certainly there are more people like me. I'm first generation. My parents were Spanish speakers. They came here not knowing the language, and this is how I sound and look. So I just started writing out of a deep frustration. And I'm pretty self-taught. I went to the Paley Center, the Museum of TV and Radio, and I would just devour while I was working as assistant gigs and working at Houston's and working at whatever job I could get. Pottery Barn for 2 weeks, just got a bunch of stuff on that discount and then took off. And I would just start like breaking down scripts, and I put up plays. I put up plays on the Hudson Avenue Theater there on Santa Monica Boulevard. And by doing that, I got the agents and managers and all that came forward. So it was just really a if you build it, they will come scenario for me.
I started out acting. I went to school for theater and I have a degree in performance. And in New York, by way of a lot of stops along the way, I was grinding at UCB and got noticed by Saturday Night Live and got asked to audition for them. and didn't get picked up for the show. And about 3 months after my SNL audition, they asked if I wanted to be in the writer's room. And so I was like, I was like, I'll do that. And spent a year doing that. And I'd always written sketches, and when I was in college, I wrote one-act plays, and so I was always writing. But it really took being on SNL for me to sort of consider myself that vocationally. And then from there is sort of how I got a Netflix special that I was able to EP and got into the Insecure writer's room.
So the rest of this will function a lot more like a conversation, and I want all of us to just talk to each other and respond to one another. I figured I'd start with giving everybody the lay of the land. You know, here's just some statistics so you can actually understand the numbers behind inclusion. There was a pretty well-known study that came out excuse me, last year through Color of Change and UCLA that looked at specifically black representation in the TV writers' room. And so the known statistic is 4.8% of all writers' rooms across all television platforms in the 2016-2017 season were black writers. There hasn't been as rigorous a study done for other groups, and so the best I could find was the Writers Guild's own Hollywood Writers Report. So the latest number, these numbers are from 2014, so they're probably slightly better now, but Latinx writers, 3.3% representation out of everyone. Asian television writers, 2.9%. Native Americans, 0.1%. That's 4 people. There were basically 4 Native American writers in 2014 who wrote for television out of 4,000 people. And 2.3% were mixed race. There's not enough data on LGBTQIA. There's not data on how disability is represented in the writer's room. And so these are still areas that hopefully somebody will pick up and analyze. In terms of underrepresentation, and I'm going to turn this over to them really soon, but I just want to give you guys numbers. That's why I'm here. When you're comparing it to the United States population, Native Americans are most underrepresented by a factor of 12 to 1 in the writers' room. Latinx, second, 5 to 1. African American writers are underrepresented compared to the US population by a factor of 3 to 1. And Asians are close. It's like less than 2 to 1, so we've fixed that. It's fine. It's no problem. The Color of Change report had some useful terms that I'd like to use to sort of guide us in this conversation for the next hour. They talk about how writers' rooms, there's different adjectives. If you're an isolated writer's room, then you're the token. You're the one of your type in the room.
Unfamiliar.
Yes, exactly. So, I'm going to ask you guys about that. And then we'll move into, what it means to be included, which means that there's at least 3 writers of color or marginalized writers in a room, to then liberated as like the whole promised land where you've got like a showrunner who represents this community with 5 or more writers. So we'll start with isolated. The Power showrunner Courtney Kemp has used this term called Blackopedia, or Blacktionary, which she uses to say that's like if you're the only black writer in the room, you become Blackopedia for the room, and everybody's like, hey, is this offensive? Like, what do you people like or not like, So, and I think that in the workplace, if you are the one, sometimes you do become that function. But how do you feel about it? Because some people take up that are willing to take that responsibility. Some people are like, why should I be treated this way? So I'd just like to open it up and ask you guys.
It's terrible!
Yeah.
I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible because I've been in rooms where I was the only woman and the only person of color. And then you're expected to speak for all women and all people of color, which is, it's all crazy because when I think, Mike Royce, who's my partner on One Day at a Time, he's so woke now. He can't like unsee. And he's like, God, it's stressful enough just for a white guy to walk into a room and be fun. Like that's stressful enough. And seeing you and seeing the staff, I realized, they come in with like 20 more obstacles.
And I think too, the idea that a white person at the same pay grade is getting paid to write, and then I'm getting paid to educate, to like regulate the temperature, to be the sort of sounding board. And yeah, I'm only getting paid to do one of those things. So it becomes increasingly frustrating when I have to go in and be excellent at the job, because if I don't, then that means they won't later. Then it's that, and then it's also, okay, I also have to gird my loins for something offensive that I can't show that I'm mad at. And then I have to correct gently enough that it won't offend the people in the room. So it's a very tricky position to be in. It's not ideal.
I think there's, too, what you're saying about the balancing act of the gentle course correction versus the guys, we really can't do this course correction. I've many times had to be the person to say, we only have one black person, let's not kill them, you know? And I am more than happy to do that, and I will stand for my black people and, you know, try to make it, if the person is gonna die, at least let it not be gratuitous and for absolutely no reason. But I feel like there has to be someone who's standing on the precipice saying, we're about to go off of a cliff. And sometimes it just has to be said in a more aggressive fashion.
And when you're the only person in the room, you're sacrificing a lot by putting yourself out there. Because, oh God, I want everyone to love me and I don't want to lose my job. So when you have two people, the Pose Writers Room is Janet Mock and myself out of 5 people, so 2 women are trans. And it's amazing because I'll have an idea and then Janet will say yes. And I've had that experience too. And suddenly it's not just 2 people. It's Janet, it's myself, and it's the community. So even just 2 people who are from a marginalized group being in the writer's room breaks it open to a whole new level of authenticity.
That's great. And so a lot of times that one person of color in the writer's room is actually in a network paid spot, right? You know, most of the major networks all have writing programs that nurture, and LaToya, you mentioned, I mean, Warner Brothers is not specifically for diverse people, but there's, you know, ABC and CBS and NBC have them.
Yeah, especially because in my class in Warner Brothers, I was the only black person, and there were only 2 women, so.
Yeah. But certainly one thing that we've been hearing, you know, in terms of the diversity programs, the diversity writers workshops, is that, you know, you do get, they're very, very competitive. They're hard to get into. Once you do get them, then you get a spot in a writer's room that is actually not paid out of the show's budget. You know,
the first season.
Correct. The network pays for it. But then that's had the side effect of, for one thing, your experience in the writer's room. There have been writers who have said, they're just told, well, you're the diversity hire, you're there so that, you know, we can say that we've got one. And then, but then you don't really get a chance to elevate. I've heard about people who've just stayed at staff writer year after year after year because if you're elevated, then it's got to come out of the show's budget. So I just was wondering, what are some remedies that you guys can propose? And again, I know you're not network executives, you know, but in the experience of the writer's room, if a writer is in that seat, what can they possibly do to make the best of that situation, that arrangement?
I think the writer has to be really good at their job, period. When you're a staff writer, come in, be prepared. You're not gonna be asked to solve like the big story problems. Do what you can to help the other writers. But I think in the situation that you're talking about where someone is relegated to being a diversity hire where it's considered a bad thing, I think the onus is on the showrunner to make the environment very welcoming for that writer and to make sure all the other writers, no matter what level they are making sure that they're including those writers in those conversations and making it about them having a real seat at the table versus them just being a token person that they've hired.
Mm-hmm.
Agree. I think that the showrunner, I mean, I really think that the change will come when, like, obviously I'm a Latina, so it's important for me as a people, for the children, for the, you know, it's important for me that change happens. What is more meaningful is when white allies come together and they take it upon themselves. Because I think what you have to do as a showrunner is you have to go above and beyond for those people. Yes. I'm creating showrunners. That's how I look at my room. This is a staff that's helping me make the show, yes. But I also want to teach them how to do this so that it's not me on all the panels for Latinas, because there's going to be so many that I can take a Saturday off sometimes, right? Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I also feel like there's how you're seen and allowing how you're being seen to affect how you behave in a room. So even though when I was at SNL, I was the only black writer on the show. It's when they picked up Sashir. And there were black people on the show, but when it came down to it, when the actors went home, I was the only black person in the room. And I remember the first couple of months, I was just like wilting, right? Under the pressure, under the gaze, and like, I gotta mind my P's and Q's. And after the first couple of months, I was like, fuck that. Like, I'm here, right? I'm in the room, like, fuck it. And I began to behave as if I belonged there. And that's when the tide changed. And I would say, again, white allies are clutch, and it was being able to talk to, I had one, Brian Tucker, who's an amazing writer, an amazing person over at SNL. And he was been there for 15 years at this point. And I remember coming to the room, I was like, look, I was like, I need someone to advocate for my sketches and to like fight for me, because 40-year-old white institution don't always have ears for people of color. And so I found my voice through speaking out and advocating for myself. So I'm not in the showrunner position yet, but until I am, I feel like as a writer in those rooms, the only thing I could say is to behave as if you belong there and not are there on a visa. You're there, and you belong there, and you need to act and behave as if that's real, because it is.
And on a staff too, I would say, make yourself so valuable. I mean, really the job of the staff is to alleviate the job of the showrunner. So if you can find a way to make yourself valuable to that showrunner, sometimes I remember when I would feel like in the room I would say something, and as the only woman and only person of color, it would be scary. I would email him at night. I'd email the showrunner like, hey, I had some ideas. I had some things that I felt like if I say this in the room, someone's just gonna knock it down. But if I am constantly sending him ideas, he knows I'm generating things, even if I don't have a particularly courageous day.
I think one of the biggest blessings I had at Transparent was when I would speak, Jill Soloway would say, shh, to everyone. And then, because I was terrified, being a staff writer, being the only trans person in this room, I was like, oh, I'm gonna mess this up really bad. And luckily, I had a showrunner who stopped the cis white men from speaking over me. And it's not something that they were aware of. It was just, it comes with privilege. And then eventually, it all turned into this beautiful orchestra where we all knew when it was our turn to speak up and when it was our turn to listen to someone else.
Jay, earlier when you mentioned, such a beautiful example of the difference, what a difference it is to go from being one to having just even one other person in the room to be able to back up your ideas. And so as we move from the isolated experience to a more inclusive room, how has not just the culture of the room changed, but even what was reflected in terms of the characters that were created and conceived, because you guys have all, been in rooms that where you've had both experiences.
I mean, to go from SNL to the Insecure writers' room, it was just like, can you see a brand new day? Like I was doing like African dance on the way to the parking lot. Like shit got crazy because I walked in and I was just like, our showrunner's black, like our creator, producer, executive producer's black. There were women who were over the age of 40 in the room. And then it was just like, we had one white dude, one cis white dude, straight white dude. We had the LGBTQIA community represented. It felt like a place where I didn't have to explain away my presence. I was like, oh, we're all here. And it felt too, we were all different in the room. And I think a lot of times with the sort of tokenism, you think I've got one, so I've got it all. And it was the first time I realized, I was like, oh, there are so many varied stories around this table. Like, I'm a black woman, and there are 4 or 5 other black women in this room, and all of our stories and experiences are different. So it allowed us to create really nuanced characters because everyone had different stories. And to me, it was just like, oh, I was like, this is what white men feel like all the time. This is great. So I was like it was a wonderful transition into a inclusive, diverse writer's room.
I think it's all about that. It's like, do you want stories that are nuanced, or do you want broad tales of inaccurate diversity. And I think that, you know, with so many ways to consume television, like, it's getting more and more competitive, and people do want nuance, and the hiring practices back up the business of it.
I know for me, most of the shows that I've worked on, I was usually like the only woman, the only person of color. And then I got a job working at AMC on Turn, and there was another black woman in the room with me, and I was like, oh my God, I see you!
Do they know?
I know, do they know? It was so amazing. And like from day one, I tell you, like, Aida Kroll, I love you. She's amazing. She was backing up my ideas from that first moment. We were working in our offices together all the time to come up with pitches for story ideas. We got some black people on the show set during the Revolutionary War. We were just gelling from the beginning, and I can't say enough about how good that feels when you know there's someone there that has your back, and it's not just for show, it's like for real. We want each other to do well. We want the entire room to do well, but we rooting for everybody black.
That's such an important point, actually, too, because so many times, because this industry makes you feel like we can only have one, and so it would be easy to then actually have feelings of competition, like I've got to get this one spot, but actually backing up one of those is important. It helps because it opens the doors and it creates more chairs so that you don't have to just be fighting over one.
I feel like it's the idea of scarcity and abundance, and approaching this industry with this idea of scarcity is put into our brains because there's always been one. But now, because there are more platforms than ever, I feel like industry executives are like, people of color can make money. And so now they're like willing to support new ideas, and there's more roles than ever. I felt that kinship where before it was just like, the assumption was, oh, we're gonna be enemies. But the truth is that we're each other's advocates. Or if I book something and someone offers, I'm like, no, but I know who you can hire. I know who's really good and who can hire and who doesn't look like what we've already seen.
I think that speaks to the spiritual nature of writing itself. Is I know I can't sit down in front of my computer if I'm terrified of anything. You have to have a flow of abundance in your work so that the work can come through, so that you can reach a level of honesty and integrity in it. And I think that that's the amazing thing about being around other writers, is that as competitive as the business is, we do feel like we can give to each other and we can teach each other. You know, to be showrunners, we can lift each other up, and that's why I'm not going back to being a classical pianist.
I wanted to ask a question about actually just writing and the creation of characters and story, because I think as we do move from sort of, you know, it used to be like, oh my gosh, we have a black cast member on SNL, now we got to go find a black writer in the room, to, you know, do you feel that we're getting to a place where you can write any kind of character? And is that even a desire you have, you know? Because there's still a scarcity of characters of color and LGBTQIA characters disabled. So is there even a desire to even do that? And secondly, I was inspired by something we were talking about backstage is, you know, this is something that's usually more posed towards actors, but I wanted to ask for writers. The writer Glenn Mazzara has talked about how he has moved away from writing characters that are colorblind, because usually that means that you end up writing a white character and you just don't say that it's white, to writing culturally specific or color-conscious characters.
I think what he's saying is like the casting will just automatically default to white.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he actually writes it in to write like his scripts. This is a Lebanese character or whatever, and everything about, you know, as with everything else, it informs the character. And so I wanted to know, as writers, how do you feel about when you're creating a character? How much is, you know, race, gender, sexual orientation, things like that, a part of the character creation?
I mean, I feel like when I write for me, the character's black, so I don't have to, there's no sort of like, how do I make the language suggest? It's just obvious, right? And I find when I'm taking said thing out to sell, I do have to do it in the writing and say, this character is a person of color or comma, black, you know what I mean, in the character description. But I feel like I personally, when I write from my POV, and so like, especially if I'm writing characters of color on the show on Insecure or for myself, to me, the casting question of just like, how do you let other people know it's okay for black people to sound like this, right? How do you let other people know that it's okay that women also are, you know, they want to, you know, for my character on Insecure, you know, she horny, she out there, like it's okay to put that in a person of color's mouth. And so it's the permission, I feel, it's outside of me as the writer. It's almost how people view the material.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think for me, I think when you are specific, that's very helpful. And so writing on a show like Into the Badlands that's set in a dystopian future, I really want to make sure that there's people of color in the future. Right. And so I say black, I say Latinx, I say something, you know, in the description so that casting will know what to do. And it's a challenge because we shoot that show in Ireland, and so there are not a lot of people of color. And so if you got to fly somebody out from the UK, you got to do it. But there's going to be some people of color in the future.
Or outer space. Or Westeros. I'm just saying.
That's real. I'm sorry.
Yeah, at the beginning, because there was such scarcity in representation, I felt that I needed to create people that I saw in my life, positive portrayals specifically. I think that true diversity will come, like now that I'm developing other projects, now I'm like, all right, now I can write like an addict that's Latino. Now I can write, because I've already showed them this other thing. And so it does feel problematic at first, especially on One Day at a Time. It's very through a female lens. The character of Penelope is very much me. And the men, you know, her ex-husband is a Latino man who has PTSD from serving in the war and is an addict and, you know, is problematic. And I was like, it's really important for me to also then show her father being a wonderful, kind Latino man, because that's just nothing. When we were casting, it was really interesting. We were casting the part of Victor for One Day at a Time, which is her husband. The reels that we got from established Latinx actors was cops, sexy firemen, a Latin lover. Like, they were so stereotyped that I was like, do they have anything where there's just like a dad? Nothing. And, you know, I had always looked at it through a female lens, and so through the male lens and how we treat our men culturally, I think is really important, especially when kids are growing up watching this stuff. The way they're really viewing Latino men is as gangbangers, as drug dealers, as that's still very much in the consciousness. And, you know, Fabiana Rodriguez is an incredible activist. She talks a lot about culture, which is what we are creating here, and the impact of culture to politics. And she's talking about roughly, once somebody sees something on TV, it takes about 10 years for the culture to really affect that change in terms of policy. And she talks about Laverne Cox, she talks about Ellen DeGeneres, and how all of those that positive representation of a real human made policy for gay marriage, trans rights, all of that stuff you can see. And as a Cuban American, my parents came here in 1962. 10 years after, I Love Lucy aired on television. And In Your Homes was a very funny Cuban guy. And you're like, oh my God, those guys are the best. We love Cubans. And so the door was wide open. My parents came here at 15 years old, and then they were in Sanctuary, and then they got their, you know, they got to become citizens, a path to citizenship, buy homes, send me to school, etc. Here we are in 2018, and what's happening? We have children in cages, and they're still there. So it's the impact is really, really important to see these things, and we have to think about how we're representing so that somebody who doesn't have any friends that look like us or sound like us will go, oh, they are just like us for X, Y, and Z reasons. That's just like my friend. That's just like this person that I know and care about. And then the treatment becomes different. How they treat us becomes different as a result.
There's a lot of interrogation that has to happen when you walk into a room and you're representing a group of people who have been stereotyped for so long. You have to like counter that your own I guess, uninterrogated privileges around that. It's like with a trans person in a writer's room, it's different than writing for like a jazz musician, say. I've had people say, well, you know, if you can write for a straight white man, why can't I write for a trans person? I'm like, well, you can. But here's the deal, is that you're taking all these stereotypes with you, and you need to constantly interrogate those stereotypes. And until we have more representation, you're going to continue to recycle those stereotypes. And so I think, like, I want to make sure that I balance the we can write for everyone because we can, with this idea that there is still so much that you gravitate towards in negativity when a group of otherized and marginalized people are being represented.
That's such an important point because context is necessary, and you can't. This isn't one of those things where in a vacuum, if everything was equally represented, then it's kind of like when we talk about casting and like why is it not okay to cast a character of color with a white actor, whereas we're like also happy when Samuel L. Jackson plays Nick Cage. Like it's Nick Fury.
It's another movie.
That would be interesting. But it's because of context, and it's because of this understanding of residual institutional imbalance and historical imbalances. That's so true. I wanted to ask a question now about crafting career strategy, because I remember there was an interview you did, Gloria, where this was back, I think, when One Day at a Time started, where you talked about how coming up through like How I Met Your Mother and shows that were not Latinx specific. And this choice that you make is to how is my career going to be different if I choose to be in the room of a quote unquote mainstream show versus an ethnically specific show? I think Kenya Barris has referred to this as well too, having written for like Soul Food and having been dismissed by his peers, just saying, well, that's a BET show, like nobody watches that. Nobody, meaning no white people watch that, therefore nobody watches it. Talk to me about the strategy, and are things different now where perhaps different choices can be made?
I hope so. I hope things are different now. So yeah, at the beginning of my career, my first show was a short-lived Fox show called Quintuplets. And that was the room. It was a very white room and very nice people in that room. But I realized, as the diversity hire, what do I do here? And the choice I made was I have to show them I'm just like them, which I don't like that as a thing to. I don't suggest that to anyone. But in that moment in time, as a young writer, terrified in a room, that was what I felt my course of action was. And I would tough it out, and when things would happen, I'd have to go to the bathroom a lot, and I'd really Annette Bening in there. I'd weep, splash water on my face, and walk back in, right? Like determined. And after that show, I met Carter Bays and Craig Thomas on that show, and they created How I Met Your Mother, and they wanted me on How I Met Your Mother, and I subsequently got an offer on George Lopez's show. Now, I also was in my late 20s. I wanted to tell stories about dating. That's what my wheelhouse was anyway, and I loved the script and I loved the guys, but they were offering me double to go work on George Lopez. And I did sit with myself, and I saw so many people of color that I knew that once they went down that road, they couldn't make the leap to a dominant culture show because they're the black writer or the Latino writer. And so I really made the decision for many reasons, but one of them was I need to brand myself as a good writer. Mm-hmm. And then the moment I feel that I know what this is, then I'll say, and I'm Latina, and I'm going to tell those stories now that I've been entrenched in this world. Because it was also, a lot of people, even at the beginning, wanted me to write my family. And I heard again and again, don't do it, Gloria, until you are 1,000% sure that you can throw down and you can fight for it, because I saw it too many times. We get really excited whenever there's a new Latino show, and then you watch it and you're like, so that's the choice I made at that time. And I loved being on How I Met Your Mother, and it was a great show and a great experience, and I made less money, but I also feel like I established enough credits for people to take me seriously as a creator and as somebody who's worked in networks, so that by the time I got to the point where I could write my family, I felt like now I can throw down because I can scoreboard. I can be like, oh yeah, So that was the path. I do think, though, as writers, I do think we need to think about what our branding is. something that we didn't really have to do before. I think now, with so many places out there that are buying content, it's important to say, there's people that watch the show because they like me and they support, they're like, we like what you're trying to do and we want to support that. And I think the way actors used to be a sort of cult of personality, I think for writers and creators, there's that too. There's people who want to see your story and want to support your story. Mm-hmm. And so part of the journey now needs to be, what types of stories do I want to tell? What types of characters do I want to put out there so that these people trust that this content is coming from me? Ryan Murphy, I think, does a great job. Jill Soloway does a great job with that. Prentice does a great job with that. You trust that, like, I'm going to like something coming from them.
Right.
Yeah, and I think just to go off of what you're saying, Gloria, I think people should brand themselves, not let other people, your agents or your reps, tell you what you are supposed to be. If you like soap operas, go write, the soapy type of show. If you like genre, like I like genre, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it, because you can.
I feel it both ways as an actor and as a writer. And after SNL, like, people want to talk to you, want to meet with you, and want you to do things. And I remember sitting down with my team very early on, and I was like, don't send me caricatures, send me characters. I'm not showing up to do something that's been done in a cliched way. And if I go in a room with that script, I'm gonna subvert the shit out of it. You want big and loud, I'm gonna be soft and subtle. You know what I mean? Like, just as a fuck you, see me different, right? And I feel writing-wise, too, I can't agree more of just branding yourself and what you find is funny, because in an industry where they want you to fit in a certain idea, you have to really fight to be seen different, and sometimes take L's. Like, I've turned down stuff, and I'm like, oh God, why? Because you want to be seen in a specific way, but that can come with sacrifice as well. But I definitely feel like I'm at the point in my career, the choices that I'm making as a writer and as a performer, for me, it has to speak to me, it has to excite me, because days on set as a performer are long, and you have to really love what you're doing. And to be in a room and to write on something, you have to be really, really excited about it. So that's how I'm choosing to navigate, and I feel like I'm fortunate to do that now, like in this specific time in Hollywood history, where we have, again, so many platforms and opportunities and voices wanting to be represented. You can really decide, if you're a genre writer, write that shit. If you want to act in period pieces, then fight for that. We're at a place where you can actually advocate for the kind of career you want, but with that, knowing there's sacrifices that come with that.
You know what, and to add to that, I think that we all as writers have to be much more rough on our agents. Because your agent's job,
Amen.
Okay? Your agent's job is to get you work.
Take out your pens.
Okay?
Yes.
Write this down.
Write
Your
it down.
agent's job is to get you work. So they're like, okay, you have a funny comedy sample, and you're like, but I want to write genre. No, you can only write comedy. Then you better come up with a genre script that blows it up. And you give it to your agent. Because the one thing that I constantly do, and that I hear from writers that work, is they hustle.
Yes.
It is writing. The shit that you guys will never see that I wrote that's on my computer, there is so much, because I'm writing. And that is why, like, they said, oh, I was like, I really want to try, like, 1 hour light comedy. I think that would be cool to, but Gloria, you're a sitcom writer. Oh yeah, I wrote that shit, I got on that shit. I wanted to write genre, so like, iZombie, I did it. I hated genre, I hated it. I liked the zombies. I didn't like this is the killer and the killer. I don't like that shit. But I did it. I got hired on that. I wanted to try single cam, multicam hybrid, drama, soap. I did all of it and got paid to do it. And you do it and you go, this is the shit I like and this is the shit I don't like. Your agents do not determine that for you. You can determine it, but you have to show them, because they don't know. Pobrecito, man. They don't know. They don't know. They think like one person can do what they don't understand. So you have to put it upon yourself.
They try.
I know and I have great agents. I love my agents, but they need to like, this is what I want to do, and they're like, Gloria, no. You can determine what you want to do, but you got to show them that you can do it. And as a showrunner, there's writers that I read, and I go, ooh, there's something here. This isn't maybe right for this, but maybe I'm gonna put it in my back pocket for something. And then I had a show last year, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna see what those writers have been up to. Every single writer sent me the agent sent me the same sample. And I said, it's been a year and a half. Just send me something else. Oh, no, that's all they have. That's all they have?
In a year?
Yo,
no.
I got to send you off, and you got a week to
Never.
write a script. You can't write a new one in a year and a half? Keep writing. Write those samples. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing, keep writing, keep writing.
It's the work, and I've gotten caught in this mental space where I'm like, it's not fair, I'm trans, I have to work extra hard. I can write straight people too, I can write cisgender people, but it is the work, and if you keep working, and if you prove to your management and your agents that you're here to work, you're here to win, you're here to stay, you're not moving on, you're not a token hire, when you put that work in, then you see the tide shift. It really wasn't, I wrote for Transparent for 4 seasons, and now I'm entering my 2nd season of Pose, and it wasn't until a year ago where I started getting scripts about like cisgendered straight folks. Or I started getting calls for those, and I was like, yes. I can write for that woman. Yes. I believe I know what it's like to be a mother. I have the same, the same humanity as this person has, and they're finally seeing me as equal.
One of the best lessons I learned, and it's just the sheer volume you write for SNL, is be prolific, not perfect. Because I, for a long time, was afraid to write because I was like, it has to be perfect. But in writing in such volumes and in such discipline, it was like, oh, my best got better. And my worst, not so bad. You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, the more you do it and the more you give yourself permission to fail and to free that inner critic, you begin to write volumes and you begin to feel like, okay, you want a sample? I got it. You can sit down and push one out and not feel like you're giving somebody the worst because you've been at it. It's like the same thing when I show up to the gym and it's my first time in a while, my trainer knows. But if I've been at it, she's like, okay, you've been doing stuff on your own. You know what I mean?
I think there's 2 really important acknowledgments here from what you guys are saying. And one is just the reality of, that maxim, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And that's just the reality. And if you want to succeed, you'll just have to accept it. But if you do accept that, then hopefully the people that come after you won't have to work twice as hard. They can work just hard. Yeah, hard. But then the second...
Just regular hard, not super hard.
But I think the second piece of awareness is recognizing, and it came out a lot when you guys were talking about, what it was like back when you were the only one in the room, is there's actually a huge amount of imposter syndrome or lack of confidence oftentimes that people from marginalized communities face. And so, there's that funny phrase, it's like go in there with the confidence of a white man, but you kind of do, and you have to sort of really push past your own writerly insecurities.
It's a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah, and learn that because in order to succeed, because sometimes there is less of a benefit of a doubt afforded.
And just do the work. Just do the work. Because for me, I know I could have been, my mom is a big support, what's your name? You go in there, make sure not to, she's the biggest cheerleader. And I would still sit in that room and be like, oh my God. Oh Lord, lunch is here. Is that the people telling me to leave? No, it's lunch. Okay. It is hard to be in there. If you are the only one, for me anyway, it's just terrifying. Do the work. I couldn't focus on feel positive and that wouldn't have worked for me. It was just you know what? Put your head down, do the work. Look at the scripts and solve the problem. If you solve the problem, they will see that you're solving the problem.
Yeah, and I think that's why, especially when you're starting out, try not to think about all the other things. Just focus on, if you're in a comedy room, I can pitch jokes. I can come up with 20 jokes right before we start, and then maybe I'll use none of them, but maybe some of them will land. Maybe some of them will be used. And for me, on my first job, there were people with 20 years experience. This is my first goddamn job. I was like, oh my God, this is very intimidating, and you just have to just grind it out and do the work and know that it will get better, because you're gonna get better every time you pitch. If you flame out, that's fine. Come with some more. It's just like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah, stay ready so you don't got to get ready. Because when the opportunities come, they're not going to come how you think or when you think. They will surprise you, and that's how I felt with Insecure. I was like, I'm sorry, what, huh? You getting on a plane? Cool. You have to be ready for it when it comes, and that only comes from doing the work. That's the only way.
Every writer knows what it's like to go from an outline to that first draft. You always have that imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And the more you do
Yesterday.
that, the more scenes that you're right, exactly, the more confidence you're gonna have. And it's not gonna matter who you're with. You're gonna walk into that room with that confidence, knowing like, I made myself cry last night reading that draft, you know, or I made myself laugh. Like, it's good. I'm doing the work I deserve to be here.
I would keep that to myself, though. That part.
I made myself cry.
A couple of weeks ago, the New York Times had this story that talked about how, you know, television, you know, there's been more demand than ever. And you participate in this with a gorgeous photo, by the way.
Thank you. My mom did not like it, though, but thank you.
No moms like their
She was like, you look too stern. I was like, that's the power look, Ma. That's like
right.
I got this.
That's right, that's right. The article, the headline was something that, you know, could have been better.
Why was that the headline? It was
Right.
trash. That headline was trash.
The headline said that, you know, there's a rising demand for diverse writers on television, but there's a short supply. And that's a pretty misleading headline. It is.
Yeah, that's I was like, who picked this headline? It was really dumb. But like, that's not what the article says
It's
at all.
editors. You can blame editors. But it reminded me, because that's exactly the line of thinking, the excuse. I mean, I think it was Upfronts only a few weeks prior where
Magnum PI.
Yeah, Magnum PI showrunner Peter Lankoff was asked by a freelance journalist, I think it was Yolanda Machado, like, hey, do you have a Latinx writer? Because your star is Latinx. And
was
then
like,
it took
no.
him like a day to find one. But
Like, I think we do. No, we don't.
but the excuse was like, well, they're really hard to find, which I think probably makes all
Wrong.
the Latinx writers in Hollywood feel like shit.
No, I reached out to him. I said, I got a list of a couple hundred, so if you want it, I'll pass it along.
So what is the issue here then? The pipeline. Why are we having that perception, and what can we do to push past that gross misconception?
I think for me, in my own experience, I came from an Amish and Mennonite village on a farm in Pennsylvania. My family, they're, you know, I hate to say his name, the Trump word, they're on that team. And it's been devastating as a trans person to watch the people that I love and the people that I care about to be so misguided. I'm using that as a metaphor. Humans are lazy. We are. It takes a lot of work to get someone moving, to get someone's heart to open up, to get someone's mind to open up to something that they're not comfortable with. And for me, it's been, you know, the default is the laziness. It's saying, oh, I have to go expand my, you know, vocabulary. I have to learn.
meet people. Oh my God.
Oh gosh. And all you need to do is, I mean, and I hate to say this, but I want to instill this to anyone out there who feels frustrated. It's like you have to inspire people. That's part of it. You have to inspire people with good work. You have to inspire people with integrity. And also, sometimes you need the Twitter robots to shame the fuck out of them. So it's a community, you know, it's a community of people inspiring, it's a community of people shaming, it's like, which one do you want to be on? It's a tricky divide sometimes.
I also always want to appeal to agents and managers and executives to stop perpetuating that lie.
Yes.
Because I think the other thing that happens, and I've heard this from friends of mine who I love, who are decent human beings, they're like, oh man, must be nice to be a Latina right now. I'm like, what? Because, well, I was out for 2 jobs this year and I heard they went diversity. I said, if that was true, then boy, would it be a different statistically. I mean, I can send you, I really have sent the thing, because actors, writers, they're always like, oh no, man, diversity's taken over. I'm like, it's just not true. So please, let's just tell them you weren't as good as somebody else.
How about maybe the reason you got the job before is because you were white and you were cis and
or
you were male.
friends with the showrunner or the showrunner's cousin or
we just
whatever.
have to stop, because I think it's a way of like making somebody feel better, like, oh, they just went another way, right? It's that thing of, I think it started out innocent. Right. They went another way, but they're blaming it, so now there's this whole breed of writers that think that we are the problem when we're not. So that's a big, big part of it. The fact that was even the headline is speaking to people are believing this thing. There isn't a scarcity. There's tons of writers of color that are out there, lots of otherized people that are dying to tell their stories and just not getting the opportunity to do so.
And yeah, there's a lot of people perpetuating that story, and that's why something like that new hashtag show us your room is very important, because there are opportunities for everybody to be at the table if people will just allow them to. I think, especially on my shows, the last couple of shows that I was hired on, I was the only woman and the only person of color, so what are you doing? Like, where are all these diversity people that you're talking about in this cable space? Because I haven't seen them. And so I just think that people just need to get out of that mindset and just know that there are people who are working on the inside. I know that I'm doing all that I can in my network to try to bring new and emerging voices into the fold so that people can get a chance to tell their stories and hopefully have their own show.
Challenge your friends, challenge the people you work with. Challenge, challenge, challenge. You know, don't bypass that conversation of when someone says that awful thing and you're like, I can't believe my friend thinks that way. Challenge them, bring it out into the open, bring light into it. Let them know that you're not like a big scary monster, you still love them. Unfortunately, sometimes you do have to hold hands in this industry.
And I also think too, not just, like you saying, relying on the people up here to recommend the people of color or the marginalized people in our lives to those roles, because just hearing that, like the hubris it must have taken for someone who's running a show with a Latinx lead to be like proudly, no, there's no, like that to me is.
Couldn't find any Latinx people in California.
I mean, truly, it's just, it's shocking, but what that says to me is that someone in that position is not hearing from the people, the cis white people in their rooms, that this is not okay with us either. Because I feel like I said, like before, like the burden to show up and be woke for everybody, I'm tired, I'm hitting snooze. Like, it's a lot. So like, for those of you in this room that aren't marginalized, that don't identify as something outside of being cisgendered, like if you are in a room and you look around the table and there's more of you than not, say something. Saying, you know what, we're telling stories that deserve to be diverse, that through different lenses, our room should reflect that. So that way the onus, like we don't go hoarse, like, you know, like fighting for it. Because it's just like we're screaming.
Because it's gonna be, like, showrunners of color are going to do that automatically.
Yes.
That's just part of the DNA, wanting to help the next generation coming up. But also other showrunners that are not part of a marginalized community have to put in that effort.
Yes. Last weekend, there was a lovely event for the Women's History Museum, and Gabrielle Union was honored, and she said something that I thought was really impactful. I'm going to not say it as articulately as she did, but she said, if you really care about diversity, and you send your kids to a school where you can count the people of color on your hand, you're part of the problem. If you care about diversity, and the people at your workplace that are people of color or othered people, you can count on your hand, you're part of the problem. If you care about diversity and the pictures in the frames in your house, you can count the people that are otherized on your hand, you are part of the problem. So I thought that was really powerful because there's people that I think have good intentions and that want to help and that want to change this problem, that see the impact of how wonderful and magical and warm these diverse rooms are. I mean, I'll tell you, the white guys in my room, they are having the time of their lives. Yes. Really, they're so tired of one another. They're so happy to hear some new stories and to be around, really. So it can be a lovely, warm experience where everybody really is winning.
We had an IT guy come into the room, this white guy, and Ben Dugan, who was the one white dude in our room, looked at him and he was just like, you got another one? Like, he was shook that there was like another white, because he was just like, I love this. I love being like in on it. And we had to break the news. It's like, no, he's not anywhere. He was like, whew.
I also think, like, just because I used to be an advocate, I'm always like, it's fine to write your pithy thing on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever, saying, oh, I'm advocating for diversity. But you have to actually do something. Yeah. You have to put it into action. You have to hire people. You have to make sure the executives know these amazing writers that are just coming up. You have to do your part. We all, especially now in these times, need to be allies for each other.
Yeah. Are we taking audience questions? Where's Hassan? To tell me if let me just make one point, and while maybe Hassan or somebody gives me direction if we take audience questions, is one action point I think for the audience members is, first of all, thank every person who's here, and particularly people who are not from marginalized communities who are here. Thank you for coming to this panel.
Nice to see you.
Nice to
Welcome.
see you.
Thank you for
Welcome.
caring about that. And maybe next year, like, bring a friend, right? Like, especially somebody from a dominant culture, because I think that these are the conversations that are helpful for them to hear. So.